So we're going to use Excel Power Query again. Could also use Power BI query, Power Query, slightly different route to getting it in Power BI, but in Excel it's data. We want a new query, and on this occasion, on this version of Excel, we need to say that we want from other sources and we want to import some data from the web. So we select that option, and eventually we get a pop-up screen, and here we can paste the URL that we've been using before. Notice there's an advanced option, we'll come back to that later, but for now we can just accept the basic because very simple API to call on this occasion. So post in the API and confirm OK. Wait for a moment for the connection to be made, and it says it's trying to establish a connection, and various other things going on in the background, and then we get the Power Query menu that pops up, and a little bit more work to do this time, but we need to tell it that we want to convert these data into a table. So first thing to do is to select the button, and we have a choice as to how we're going to create it from a table. Extra columns it will show as errors. Are there any particular delimiters? Because these are all JSON records, we don't need to do anything here, we just say OK. And what you can see has happened is it has imported a number of rows, and it's told us that each of the data types are a record. So now the fun starts, and we have to start unpacking the record. And remember, we saw before it's a nested record. So we can start by pressing this icon that tells us it's going to unpack the record for us, and it asks us which columns that we're interested in. And if I remember, the persistent ID was blank, so there's no need for us to ask for the persistent ID. We can have a look, we can select the ones we want, maybe all of them, it may not be, and press OK. And you'll notice some of the columns have just been unpacked as they are. The outcome status, I think, is all null. There's an ID number, but this is nested JSON, so we have confirmation as to which month the data come from, but we still have another record field, the location field. So again, we do want to unpack that. Maybe this time I'm not so interested in the latitude and longitude, so I will deselect those and I'll press street. And when street comes through, street is also a record, so I want to unpack that as well. I'm not interested in the ID number for our purposes, so I will just select the name. And if I ask it to unpack, I get a description of the street name. And you can see, you can tell these were unpacked from a nested structure because it tells us column 1 dot location dot street name. So we get a sense of, we can relate this back to the original data, but then and remember the great thing about Power Query, we save all our steps. So if I decided, do you know what, I do want the latitude and longitude, I can go back to that stage, not that stage, I can go back to that stage, and I can select that I want the latitude and the longitude unpacked, and it'll just check I'm inserting a step. But now I've got the latitude and the longitude, and the last thing it does, it should do, this one is now at error, but the last stage is it expands the street name. So I can change the processing steps if I feel I want to. I can rename these to be something informative. Obtain columns, obtain street name, obtain lat lon street, and here, and final one, I'll rename that as obtain street name only, which reminds me that I've decided to ignore. So again, stored my applied steps. I could use them if I refresh the query, if I change the call, but I can close and load, and that's these data read into read into Excel as a table. And I can now, if I want, I can go back, no errors, but if I want, I can go back and amend the query. For now, let's just summarize with a pivot table. So on the table design menu, it instantly offers me the creation of a new pivot table. What will I do? I will put rows in the column. I'll put the force type on the columns, and I will drag any text field down to the values, because all it can do with those is count them. And we have a count of the types of crimes, whether they were dealt with by the British Transport Police or the local police force. So it must be a railway station or something fairly near here, because the British Transport were dealing with a few incidents. But we can see for those data, we can see we get a breakdown of the crimes that were happening in that area. And the one last thing I'll do is add a filter by month, and there is of course only January anyway. But that's the pivot table. So we've now extracted data. I could chart it if I want, and so on. So we've extracted data, and if at any time I want to go back, I can refresh the query, or I can go in and edit that query, make some changes to the parameter call. But now, instead of, I have a copy of the query on one of my worksheets, but this analysis now works because I am analysing data that I have obtained from a website via an API.